and welcome to the Kamla Show, where we bring you interviews and conversations with technologists, entrepreneurs, filmmakers, and other newsmakers from in and around the San Francisco Bay Area. My guests today are local Bay Area filmmakers, Maureen Gosling and Chris Simon. They are joined by Chris Strachwitz. He's the subject of their new documentary, This Ain't No Mouse Music. Chris is a roots music icon who founded Aroli Records in 1960. This is a Bay Area record company. As Bonnie Raitt commented in the film, it's impossible to look at the history of blues, Cajun, and Zydeco music without looking at Chris Strachwitz's role. He's a monumental figure. Here's a clip from the film, This Ain't No Mouse Music, and then an interview with Maureen Gosling, Chris Simon, and Chris Strachwitz on This Ain't No Mouse Music.
Mouse music. Well, mouse music is could be described as
mouse music is music that's cheap and not real.
Mickey Mouse jumps around, a little artificial creature.
music that is popular.
Cheesy, put together music with no soul.
Inauthentic.
We're gonna get this good. Oh shit. My stuff isn't produced. I just catch it as it is.
It's the music of your neighbors, you just don't know it. And Chris has been collecting it, preserving it, selling it, exposing one culture to another. I mean, he's a treasure.
Don't pay the... I just fell in love with making records. They're kind of neat snapshots. There'll never be another one like it. Most record companies, they record everything that they think is commercial, you know. I didn't want to record stuff I don't like.
He's a classic record man, not corporate, not about to take orders or fit into any kind of system, you see. Those are the kind of people that started the record business.
Congratulations, you've got this new documentary which actually premiered last year at South by Southwest, and it's called This Ain't No Mouse Music.
That's right.
And the gentleman who doesn't like mouse music is sitting right next to you.
That's right. I hope I don't have to say what mouse music means, but...
You have to. This is the 21st century.
Oh, well, it all started a long time ago when I was in high school and Dixieland music was a thing. And a friend of mine, Bill Gady, he was a trumpet player. And he forgot his line one day about a tune that he was playing. And we asked him, "What's the matter with you?" "Oh, man, I just got through playing in a mouse band." That means he played in a dance band, you see, in a kind of a Lawrence Welk type of orchestra. And they called that mouse music back in those days. And it has kind of carried on through the ages. Music that's kind of cheesy and, you know, not too hot. Mousy.
Muzak.
Muzak, there you go. Muzak is perfect mouse music. Well, and it's also, as Laurie Lewis says, any music Chris Strachwitz doesn't like.
So it is kind of produced music.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I like some produced music, you know, if it's well done, if it's earthy, if it's, you know, producing is a strange word. It can mean a lot of different things. You can produce well, you can produce terribly.
When I mean produce, I'm using it in the commercial term, in a studio with mics and everything, and then, you know, you pay them money and, you know, maybe there is soul, maybe there is no soul. I don't know. Is soul a big part of mouse music?
No, mouse music has no soul at all. It's the antithesis of soul music. It's when they just crank out something that they feel the audience likes.
When did you both hear about him and his music? Because both of you worked with Les Blank, a well-known documentary filmmaker who's no longer with us, and he made a lot of films on musicians. But when did you first hear about Chris?
I first met Chris actually when I was working with Les on a film, the second film that I worked with him on, and that was an unreleased film about at the time, well-known rock musician, and Chris came to visit Les. But then I actually, after Les shot Chulas Fronteras with Chris in South Texas, he actually asked me if I wanted to be his assistant on Chulas Fronteras. So I came to Berkeley at that point from Texas, where I was living at the time, and started working on that film. And so then I got to know Chris because of that film.
So you're a quasi-Tejano.
Yes, especially since then. I got totally turned on to Texas Mexican music at that point, and it really had a big impact on my life. And of course, I fell in love with the music that Chris was interested in. The store was right there. We could, hear great stuff down there. Chris had a radio show on KPFA, and I listened to it all the time. So I learned about Cajun music and Zydeco and all the other traditions that are on his label.
And when did you met him the same way?
Well, not exactly. I was dating Les Blank, and Chris was his best friend. I remember meeting Chris. He probably doesn't recall this, but first time I met Chris, we were going off to a dance over in at UC Berkeley, and it was rumored to be a nude dance, which was why Chris and Les were so incredibly interested in it.
They were the progressive lot.
No, it was not, but they did wear very short skirts.
So we're talking about the progressive time of the 60s?
Well, it was actually, I think we were progressing into the 70s then. It was probably 75 or 77, but yes, the boys were still very frisky.
Going back to Chris, you discovered jazz music when you were a student at Pomona. You saw New Orleans and you saw all the jazz musicians for the first time, and you got hooked to music. But you actually came from Germany, and that part of Germany that you come from is now in Poland?
That's correct.
Okay. Have you ever gone back to your home?
Yes, I have, yes. It was first orphanage, and unfortunately then the Poles left it and it fell apart. But there's now a Dutch couple. I mean, he is Dutch, she is Polish, and that have apparently purchased the place, and they're totally rebuilding it. That's the last I heard.
Okay. And from Pomona, you came to Berkeley. Now, for some strange reason, according to all the different interviews you have given, you didn't do well at school. But then you became a teacher because your sister was a teacher.
Right?
Yes, I guess I could never quite make up my mind what I wanted to study. And I tried mathematics, I tried engineering, I tried physics. And when it came to atomic physics, I said, this is like Chinese. And instead of just signing out and trying something else, I didn't go to class, so I got F's in all these classes. And but somehow when I came out of the American Army, I decided to major in political science and economics, and that was much more interesting. And finally graduated. It's amazing. I couldn't get into Berkeley now to save my soul.
And then you taught at Los Gatos for 3 years.
Yes, I taught mostly German. Because that was during the era of Sputnik, and that's what they wanted me for.
But why are the outsiders interested in blues music more than the Americans themselves? Because you are an immigrant who came here, discovered the roots music and blues music, and then Rolling Stones and others, Eric Clapton, they popularized blues in England, and then we discovered through England. Why did we have to go in such a circular way?
Well, I mean, if you look at the history of blues, they were popular from the beginning of phonograph records amongst whites almost as much as they were amongst blacks. White people in the South bought those records. Or if they didn't buy them, they would listen to them and already I'll never forget an interview we did with, I mean, this is getting very far away from the film, but with the guitar player with Bob Wills, who started with him. And I asked him, how did you guys learn blues? Like, I walked from Dallas clear into Wichita Falls and there was no walk at all. And he said, we went to the furniture store and we listened to them. That's how they learned them. But then they sang them in their own way, just like Paul Butterfield and all these people. They got the blues from Muddy Waters and all those guys, but they sang them in their own way. And of course, young white kids like it better, or they feel more at ease to hear a white guy singing the blues, because there's still this huge racial thing in this country. There's a huge divide there.
And the film, how did the start of the film happen? It was 8 years in the making, you said?
At least, really, probably a little longer. But Maureen and I basically had the same idea at the same time, and
How is that? How could that be possible?
synchronicity, the stars were in line. I don't know, but we were, talking and said, let's do a film on Chris. And we went and we talked to Chris, and he said, no, I don't want to film on me. It's a terrible idea. But about a year later, there were some other people going to do a film on him from PBS, and Maureen fortunately saved the day by saying, hey, wait a minute, you said, Chris, you said that if you were ever going to let anyone do the film, it was going to be us. And I think, I think it was fortunate all around, because those folks would definitely not have made as intimate or as knowledgeable a film as Maureen and I did.
Yes, because it's a very intimate portrait. While watching the film, did you do it in two chunks? Because for some reason, I could see that there were two chunks. Like you did all the interviews with Bonnie Raitt and, Ry Cooder and others. And then there's the traveling element where you have traveled with him to Louisiana and Mississippi and other places. So how did you shoot?
We, some of the interviews with the other people were all separate shoots. And we took two trips with Chris mainly, to Texas and Louisiana, and also to Appalachia. And the bulk of the footage was shot at those times.
The most intimate footage of him being with family was in Louisiana. How many days did you spend there with the Savoy family, right?
That was actually kind of a short trip. They have an annual boucherie, it's called, where they butcher a hog in the traditional Cajun way. And the men mostly take different parts of the hog and make incredible dishes out of them. And the Savoys always have this big party. So the bulk of our shoot there was over like a 3-day period. But Chris has had a long-term relationship with the Savoy family, and some of the footage with them is also from the Bay Area.
There's actually very little of that boucherie footage in there. I mean, we talked with Wilson another time. We filmed the Savoys several times because they're our good friends too. So it may look like it was all shot kind of in the same place at once, but that's actually not the case. It was.
And there was some of my home footage in there too.
Right. Yes, I saw the home footage. When did you first hear Zydeco music? Because that is something that Chris gets credit for introducing Zydeco music. And
I mean, I probably first heard Zydeco music when I was a folklore student at UCLA, but I remember it for sure, going over to our Hooley Records and Chris giving me some records, or maybe it was less. I mean, Clifton Chenier was really the first one that made a giant impact, going to the dances.
I was really lucky to run into this music in its formative years, because that was in Houston, Texas, in the late 50s, when these people who came from the rural parts of Louisiana and came to the urban centers like Houston and Galveston to work in the shipyards and so on. And they were still all talking French Creole. It was a pure thing still, patois, correct. And they had their own music, which was not flashy at all. Clifton was really the only one who tried to put some contemporary sounds to it, you see, by adding a little bit of soul, rhythm and blues, so to speak, and soul music to it. And the others just, they call it push and pull music, and that's what people were happy to hear all night long. Da 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 da. Baby, please don't go. Baby, please don't go back to New Orleans. Baby, please don't go. I mean, that's literally all they like to hear, but some variations thereof, you know. And I did make that amazing little record called Zydeco, the early days, and so on.
There is a live recording of a Zydeco performance that Chris does in the movie.
There's footage of Clifton Chenier and Cleveland Chenier that was shot from Drywood and Hot Pepper, that was filmed in 1972, that Les Blank shot, and I actually did the sound on it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, in the Blue Angel Club in Southwest Louisiana.
Okay, so there's a lot of interconnection, because you were working with Les Blank, both of you, and Les Blank was working with Chris on some of the films. So you have seen him at work then. You've seen Chris at work and how he records. Where did you learn how to record? Because you just picked up the mics, you got a recorder. How did you get the sound?
Thank God they invented the microphone, yes. And I was totally in love with the idea of recording ever since I came to this country. I first had myself a little tiny disc recorder, and
what is a disc recorder?
It's like an old-time 78, you see, where you put the disc on a turntable, and you have a cutter head that cuts the grooves into it, and you use a microphone and an amplifier, and that is a cutter.
Oh, so that's how you'd cut the record?
That's how you make a record, yeah. And you could do it on amateur equipment in those days. And I had bought one of those, and when I was at that school, the Latin teacher walked into my room, and I stuck a microphone in front of his nose, and I said, "Do you have any comments, Mr. Crawford?" And he said, "Yes, the rich get richer and the poor have children." And that was one of the first recordings I ever made, and it still stays with me.
Oh, so there was something called a cutter.
Yes, a disc cutter. You know, like you have to cut your acetate to make a record, 78 or LP, doesn't matter. You need to have that's the backward system, you see. To cut a record is to make it backwards.
How do you record today?
It's all digital, and it's all like you have this thing hooked up to a little Mousquetaire machine, you know.
Oh, you call it a Mousquetaire machine?
Whatever it is.
Where do you think you're going to be releasing the film? You've been showing it in different film festivals. You know, it's won an award at the Mill Valley Film Festival and other film festivals. But how do you propose to distribute the film?
Well, we have a distributor, Argo Pictures, and it's about to, on September 19th, it's going to be in theaters in the Bay Area, and the 26th of September, it's in theaters in New York, theatrical release, and then Los Angeles on October 1st, and we go on from there.
And what about VOD, video on demand?
We're actually just in negotiation with a really good company for the VOD, and we're hoping to have the DVD out really soon, as well as the other two venues. I guess we have to work on our educational and broadcast. We're going to hopefully get a broadcast of the film as well.
What was the toughest part of making this film? Because you've known him for 30 years, and you know you have to present him to an audience that may or may not have heard about him, but for sure have heard the music that he's created. So what was the toughest part for you?
Well, the two toughest parts were fundraising. That's the reason it took so long. And Chris and I had to have regular jobs to make a living, working for other people and doing our own projects. But the second hardest part was what we had to cut out, because we know this scene so well. We know Chris so well. We know the musicians. We know the breadth of his catalog. It was painful to cut our favorite friends out of the film and try to shrink it to a length of time that was, watchable.
I will say the distribution is also really tough and a pain.
Well, I think the toughest part for me is the fact that they weren't there when I started. And see, there was no film made. If I had a film like the cops do nowadays and stuck it to my head, I could have caught a lot of interesting stuff, but that didn't exist at that time.
Let me ask you one final question. This is about the singer who actually ended up making money for you, and you ended up buying that building where your record company is located. And we're talking about Joe McDonald. From a 21st century perspective, help us understand who Joe McDonald was and what did he do that ended up becoming the anthem song at Woodstock.
Joe McDonald was a very powerful protest singer. He had been in the Vietnam War. He was a Marine. And when he came out, he composed this extraordinary song that really tells the truth about, the evils of war and how the people at Wall Street make all the money while the young guys are dying in the trenches. Nothing has changed, unfortunately. It just gets more and more vicious. And a friend of mine, I was not really that aware of him at the time, but a friend of mine, Ed Denson, who called me up and said, Chris, have you got your tape recorder ready? I want to record Country Joe because we got to have this protest song out for the big march that's coming up in a few weeks. And I first said, no, I'm going with Lightning Hopkins to Europe tomorrow. But anyway, he persuaded me to bring them over. And here comes this motley crew of hippies. And I stuck the microphone, as you see, from the ceiling, as I did with J.E. Maynard's band. And as they walked out, Joe asked me, Chris, what do I owe you for the tape? And I said, Joe, you don't owe me anything, but you have a publisher for the song. And he said, no, what do you mean? I mean, in a way, I knew he was a publisher because he was a publisher of that little magazine that this record was stuck into. But anyway, he said no. And so I said, can I have it from my Tradition Music Company? He said, go ahead. And Ed Denson overheard it. It was an oral agreement. Well, when Bill Belmont at Woodstock told him, get up there and sing that song when some rock band didn't show up on time, and he went up there, and it became sort of the national anthem of the Woodstock thing, and it started selling, especially once the movie came out and all of that combined, and it became a huge hit in Sweden. Yes, all over Europe, pretty much, yeah. And I'm not sure about this country, how widely. Yes, you think so? Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
definitely. Yeah.
Well, anyway, and so when the first check came in, I gave him his half, you see, which was the usual procedure in those days, and the publisher kept his half. And with my half, I put, it was about a total of around $70,000, and with my half, I put my money down on the building that I own now in El Cerrito, which houses our Julian Down Home Music and all that sort of thing. But a few years ago, he came to me and said, Chris, don't you think you've made enough money off of me? And I said, okay, Joe, I know you're a good socialist. What, do you want the song back? And he said, yeah, I would appreciate that. And so I gave it back to him. It was probably the best deed I've done, because not long thereafter, Kid Ory's daughter, I don't know if you know who Kid Ory was, but he was the one who composed the Muskrat Ramble, an old jazz trombone player from the 20s. And she said, that's my father's song, his tune. You just put these weird words to it. Well, anyway, it came to a lawsuit, and if I had kept that, I would have had deeper pockets than Joe. I could have been in all kinds of doo-doo. I mean, I actually testified or gave deposition to the fact that the European Song Clearance Company finally cleared it, saying that's a sufficient, unique material here. This is your song. There's no worry about this coming from the Muskrat Ramble or anything like that. But if I had been still the owner, I may have not been so lucky. And anyway, that's the story of the Fixin' to Die rag.
Thank you so much for your time and doing the interview.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
It's because of him, really, that I guess I'm here now. I probably wouldn't have embraced the culture as much as I have. Of course, I mean, I would have found it, but I probably wouldn't have found it quite as interesting as I do now, you know, because I got to see it through the eyes of an outsider.
Mañana pasado yo voy a tu casa, tu mamá te ordena una silla para mí.
I don't know why I like it so much. It's just got some guts to it. It ain't wimpy, that's for sure. It ain't no mouse music.